Thank you, folks, for coming back. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce Nicholas Hall, Curator Emeritus at the Royal Armouries, who's going to be bringing the past to life with a bang. Nicholas, over to you.
The first thing I'd like to say in my talk is that scholars, if I can call myself such, students of artillery have learned so much from from nautical archaeologists, from divers, and people who put all these great projects together. Having worked at Fort Nelson for a long time, relatively close to Portsmouth, the case I know best is, not surprisingly, the Mary Rose, and I've had a good fortune. I had the great good fortune to work with people there, and that will become apparent in the talk. But I was given this wonderful job at Fort Nelson many, many years ago, of rescuing a Victorian fort for the Royal Armouries and for Hampshire County Council, who are wonderful landlords, and to create a museum of artillery there. But it was important, the team felt, that's the Royal Armouries team, that we should bring the past to life as far as we possibly could. I just mentioned the Royal Armouries sites. It's a very long established museum, starting in the Tower of London from the late medieval arsenal at the Tower, and gradually becoming more and more of a historic collection until it became a national museum in the 20th century. Below, an aerial view of Fort Nelson, where I was, of course, based, and then our headquarters, the only modern building in our portfolio, a purpose-built new museum opened in the 1990s at Leeds. Now, with a lot of inspiration from our then Master of the Armouries, Guy Wilson, and his friend and John Waller, who became a colleague, an expert in accurate historical recreations, largely for film and stage. Active display, as it were, using reenactors, staff, volunteers, has been a key part of the Royal Armouries for a long, long time. Here, just a few snapshots. At Leeds, they have a big arena, and often the displays in the arena, the events are related to the current exhibition. And top left is the one for Gladiators, which took place earlier this year. Below, we're at Fort Nelson. In fact, the other three are Fort Nelson, not just firing guns. This was a blacksmith's forge, which was originally at the fort, but most of it was missing. So I restored that to working order, and it was mainly used for display and information, education, spectacle. But we did use it for making things for the conservation department as well. A self-propelled gun. We felt we should have one self-propelled gun at least, and this is a Second World War 25-pounder. It's called a Sexton, which I learnt to drive with great delight. And then, key to Fort Nelson's history was its role as an artillery fort, defending Portsmouth from the landward side. And here we see the wonderful Portsdown artillery volunteers firing 64-pounder. With blank, of course, and this is the gun that my first slide showed this being test fired very early one morning on the parade at Fort Nelson, and that test firing was projectile to really test the gun under pressure. So it's a question of just taking a derelict Victorian fort and bringing it back to life for the public, for research, for entertainment, all those good things. And for such a museum, an artillery fortification in origin, we felt it was vital to put back whatever we could of the main armament. And we did succeed in having all levels of the armament um, installed to firing blank condition. Not all the things were in particularly good order when they came in, but this screen is the incredibly rare um, 7-inch Armstrong rifle breech loading gun. Very, very few exist. And this one was excavated and acquired by the armories from land site, didn't come from a sea site. I should perhaps just say that 7-inch was both a naval gun and a land defense gun, siege gun. So that's the barrel at Henry Irons in Cornwall, awaiting work. And in fact, I think it's just being put into the lathe. And then below the breech mechanism, which is rather complicated and extremely heavy, being operated, and on the right, the gun being run back or run in, very much like on a Victorian ship. And it's a reminder that for most of the period of artillery, and even including in some cases nowadays, you do need a lot of people to do some heavy manual work. All right, I've scrolled too fast. And that is the Armstrong being test fired at Henry Irons. That was in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Now, obviously, I'm talking about the way we at Fort Nelson brought past to life as far as we could by means of demonstration, reenactment, recreation, using people to show how it was done. There is nothing wrong in my mind, and especially as by training an art historian, with seeing and displaying fine guns as art objects. It's not either or. It's a question of both the techniques to suit the object. And so guns as art objects, I'm representing by two guns from the Mary Rose, the one on the left in the Mary Rose Museum, and the one on the right with the detail and the full length is in the Royal Armouries collection, because of course the first guns were brought up in the 19th century by the Deans. I'm just getting the hang of this cursor. And so you have fine bronze guns treated and displayed as art objects, but also in conjunction with the Mary Rose, or helping the Mary Rose Trust. I was very lucky to be involved in a project to replicate guns, not just for fun, although I'm sure some people would think it's a bit of a question of boys' toys, but there was a question that arose when Mary Rose was discovered in the 19th century. Were the iron guns possibly even ballast? That was quickly showed not to be the case. But you've got these iron guns that look rather medieval, and you've got these beautiful bronze guns literally side by side on the gun deck. So why have both? And of course, gun ports were then quite new. This was a remodeling of the ship. So we decided, not unwillingly, but with some caution, that we would have to answer. Well, one way of answering the question would be to replicate both kinds of guns and do range trials. This was a very courageous decision by the Mary Rose Trust. And Chris Dobbs, Alex Hildred particularly involved. and Guy Wilson, essentially, at the Royal Armouries to do this. We got some funding from Yorkshire Television because it became a programme, and the video is still shown in the at Fort Nelson. I think there's a copy at the Mary Rose Trust. Anyway, we decided to start with a wrought iron port piece. So you see it in the wonderful current displays at the Mary Rose Trust reconstruction, and then our replica below, which was made of real wrought iron. It isn't mild steel, and it's as authentic as could be. The mounting carriage was made at Fort Nelson. Um, this this is a view of one of the hoops being put on at Chris Tops. Sometimes you'll hear that the staves, the uprights, are welded together. They weren't, and they couldn't be. All the strength comes, the circumferential strength comes from the hoops and bands. So we got it up onto the range. It's fires stone shot, stone cannonballs, if you like. And again, going back to the muscle power, the breech, the chamber, the breech in the inset is a real lift for four people. And without much headroom on the gun deck, we've never really answered exactly how it would have been managed with, of course, two, sometimes three breech chambers. But we got useful results. It would be a lecture in itself to talk about the results. But to answer the question, we had to make a bronze gun as well. And this is a culverin by the Owen brothers. So this is a replica of one. So that was a massive task with mold making and casting. It's cast by a bell foundry, but it's not the same as bell casting. Obviously, people say, it's similar, which of course it is. But let's just put it politely that the foundry had to have two goes at casting a successful gun, and there were lots of difficulties. And in fact, this one, the replica here on the range at Shoebury NAS, with Alex Hildred aiming on a horrible day, of course. This one is no longer fireable. We didn't do anything bad to it, but the casting is not completely sound towards the muzzle. It's a modified replica of one of the Mary Rose carriages, which was an interesting project in its own right because it's very early for truck carriages at sea. Anyway, sorry, I'll go back just for a moment. The result was, I should just say that it proved that both the port piece and the culverin had extremely useful ballistic properties, but very different. And so it seems to be a good answer that culverin, fantastic long range, high velocity, and the port piece, short range, quicker to fire, and probably more anti-personnel and anti-ship structure. Another replica doing another replica made by the great Colin Carpenter of the West Country. It was made for firing blank as part of our information education spectacle program, and was used for salutes at Tower of London, for anniversaries of Henry VIII, and for public events at Fort Nelson. Although the public look a bit sparse on this particular occasion in the background, the picture is cropped a bit, and also the visitor figures are pretty good. I don't know quite what they're up to now, but really substantial visitation. And then, so this is Fort Nelson, I said. Another event, the public are behind us, just representing sort of costumed events we used to do. Then I had a question from Glenn Ford, who relocated the Battle of Bosworth. I'm sure correctly, and he'd got examples of ammunition and so on. And he asked if there was something we could fire that was roughly similar. Well, these often called serpentines. This one is undoubtedly a bit later, but it's the closest that you could get if you wanted to do some real firing, and that was with Time Team, and that went very well with a lot of well, collaborating with the Defence Academy at Shrivenham, who decided they really wanted to have a new breech block, breech chamber, sorry, here. And this wire is I think they were very wise. They just made one. That's the sort of place it is. But it gave a pressure sensor, and this is the only gun that we've fired that we got pressure readings. And firing lead ball mostly, and dice shot with a core of iron usually or flint. And this is a fired one, fired with a wooden tompion above the powder charge and beneath, of course, the shot. And it's indented by the tampion on firing. And that proved that it was the same technique as was used actually at the Battle of Bosworth. In other words, Glenn Ford found original shot like that. I'm almost certain, I apologise, that this won't play, but I've tried my best and it won't. But that was slow-mo on the range, so we'll hurry quickly ahead. And then, although a lot of this obviously is research and not a public event. Sometimes it's for television, so we're reaching a lot of people like that, bringing the past to life. This one was another trial, a very rare one that at Fort Nelson I got special permission to fire a projectile because we didn't usually fire projectile at Fort Nelson. And this was a request from Bournemouth University for a postgrad student in doing her dissertation on battlefield traumas in history, pre-modern as it were, and they wanted me, that's her tutor, wanted me to fire at a deer that they would provide. I said I would do it if they gave me some venison, but they never did. And because I had to buy the shot, I didn't have any lead shot left. We had to use iron shot, and I did some trial shots before they arrived, and I had greatest difficulty in hitting the target. That's top left, with a stop at the back of a huge builder's bag of sand, and a backstop of the rampart, so nothing was going to escape from the fort. And I puzzled and puzzled. And anyway, I sorted this out by shortening the range. And it only dawned on me afterwards that firing iron shot in a wrought iron barrel, which with the techniques of the time, and blacksmithing is fantastic, but the techniques of the 16th century would not produce a wrought iron barrel that was perfectly true cylinder, so to speak. And the lead shot here, not only is it better ballistically, but I'm convinced that with it spread by the impact of the tampion that I showed you with the lead ball with the dent in the back, and so it sealed the gases, so it gave you more power. But more importantly, it didn't bounce down the bore. So that's, I think, why the iron shot was less accurate, because it was essentially rattling down the bore. The bore definitely had a constriction. So anyway, happy client with obviously the deer was dead, but very fresh, with and sort of vaguely well, no, closely comparable for this purpose to a human anatomy. So anyway, it did the job, and they got Bournemouth University to X-ray and show the damage. So I think I'll have to hurry over this a bit. It's not really supposed to be my life in television, but this was for the BBC about the armament of the ship cast away by Alderney, Norris's flotilla to go and help the French Protestants in the late 17th century. Casting again was a bit of a technical challenge, and this is a firing at Alford's quarry in the West Country. Very, very good range. No one can see what you're doing. You're in a deep hole in the winter. But I suppose the most important point with this one was showing reasonable accuracy, throwing lots of oak splinters around, which Telly love. And there were quite a lot of bar shot and crossbar shot on this wreck. The name of the wreck isn't known, and they wanted me to see whether I could produce something visual for that. So we changed target to cheap plywood, and I'd never done this before. I don't think anybody has, at least not that I know of. And I had no idea what would happen. I just couldn't believe it when they went through sideways. I mean, obviously they're going to rotate in flight and spin all over the place, but you don't know exactly how they're going to hit the target. So I don't know about the I think I'm muddling up my terminology. I think the one with the spikes, I'm not sure. I mean, you wouldn't enjoy being hit by it, but I would have thought for anti-rigging and those sort of purposes, the upper one would be more effective bar shot. Okay. I almost apologise for going back to television, really, but it's you get some really interesting projects sometimes, and this horrible photo is of a Dutch gun that used to be in the Yasukuni Shrine, obviously in Japan, and it's the type, if not, well, it's believed to have actually been used in the siege of Osaka Castle, which ended the Shogun Wars and started the dynasty of the Tokugawa. So it's a major event in Japanese history. Sadly, this bronze gun disappeared after Japan surrendered. I wonder if it's in a collection somewhere, but I haven't been able to trace it. So I had this photo, and Japanese NHK TV asked me, could I make a replica of it for firing? And there was some budget, but there was certainly no budget sufficient to cast one. And also, I had to find something to take a mold off. So this is fortunately Rudy Roth, great member of the Ordnance Society, which publishes a superb journal, if anyone's interested. Some of you may already be members. This is a drawing Rudy did for the journal, and it's of a gun, 12 pounder a Dutch gun, about the right date, at private collection at Quex Park, open to public, of course. So that seemed to be a good bet. Let's hope, yes. That's the gun in question at Quex Park. And on a British 19th century garrison carriage, so ignore the carriage. It's a very fine bronze gun by one of the great Amsterdam founders, a Hazelrus Costa, built for the town defence of Amsterdam, but purloined for the Navy when the Dutch Navy was short of guns, and lost on an English ship in the Solent. I'm missing out several stages there. So I decided the only way of doing it, and people have done this sort of thing, but the only way of doing it was to use a steel tube. But some of the guns that are made like that are absolute disgrace. I condemned some once. It's another story. So anyway, I had a very good firm in Chichester who took a mould off the gun, and I wanted to steel tube, but I had the availability of a unused tank barrel, and the rifling doesn't matter with round shot anyway. We accepted that, and so I had to draw it all up. So we had the tank barrel machined the right length, and a lot of what we didn't want taken off, a new breech block made to fit in permanently. And it was really heavy, very fine threads. It was really difficult to line up. If you got it cross-threaded, that would be the end of the story. Anyway, it was an interesting project. So I mentioned the fiberglass. It got a fiberglass jacket with a lot of powdered bronze in it, and I was quite pleased with it, I must say. And we took it to the range for NHK, fired ball. That was a carriage I happened to have. It's not really correct for the 17th century, but it's not too bad either. That's the team to it, my lovely technicians and the range officer, John on the right, and Kishi from the TV on the left. And that is, oh, sorry, getting too eager here. That's just a sort of atmospheric, perhaps, view of the near target. But we were firing with no trouble at 100 meters, and this was on Salisbury Plain, where I went several times. Wonderful range staff there, and that just move on. I don't think this will show, but I'm going to. I'll just see. But it was a fabulous slow motion, which plays on my computer, but I'm not sure that it will play on here. I seem to have cut it off, but that is the end of my talk. It's a great privilege to speak to members of the NAS and guests, and I've been incredibly lucky with my museum career. And thank you very much for listening.